I got my first computer. I think a lot of you have seen this computer. And it was the best day of my life. And I asked my mom, she basically spent everything she had so that I would have something to do during the summer while she was doing her 2 jobs. And I asked, well, can I get the internet? She said, okay. So I got the internet. It's first day, turned it on, dialed up, and went onto Metacrawler and started searching the X-Files. And I found all these awesome websites all about the X-Files. And I just played sound clip after sound clip after sound clip. You had to like wait for it to download, but now as I was doing that, I finally found, I was like, man, maybe there are people who want to chat about the X-Files with me. So I found message boards. Today we call them forums. And I went on and I started chatting. I was like, hey, who wants to chat about the X-Files? What's your favorite episode? And I'd refresh, and I'd refresh. Like 2 hours later, someone responded. I was like, yes. And I responded, and then I'd refresh. I just sat there refreshing. I'm like, there's got to be a better way. So I start searching some more, and I find something called IRC, Internet Relay Chat. I was like, oh, this is awesome. I can actually chat with people who want to talk about this kind of stuff. So I go into the first chat room I find, and I say, hey, who wants to chat about the X-Files? And someone says, get out. Like, what? No, I just want to chat about the X-Files. We can chat about whatever episode you want. And he says, you have 10 seconds to get out of this chat room. I'm like, what? I don't even know you. A random guy on the internet? So no. So I wait, and 10 seconds later, my brand new computer that my mom spent everything she had crashed. And I freaked out. I had no idea what to do. So whenever something bad happens to your computer, I think the first thing you're supposed to do is like unplug it. So I unplugged it from the wall. And I gave it like 30 minutes for the bad stuff to like get out of the computer. I think that's how they work. And I plugged it back in, and I'm like, oh my God, I'm gonna be grounded for the rest of my life. And I turned it back on, and I knew I was in a lot of trouble. Just like sweat coming down my face. And I turned it back on, and everything was okay. I was like, oh my God, thank God. And in that moment, with just the adrenaline like rushing through my body, still a little scared, but happy that everything's okay, I thought, that was the coolest thing ever. How do I do that? And that basically spiraled down for the rest of my life, trying to figure how do I do that? And not to be malicious, right? But something really intoxicating about being able to control a system, a machine, a framework, something that you don't know nothing about the moment before. I think that's really exciting. That's very cool. So I started looking into it, and I started trying to find other chat rooms where people talked about this. Screw the X-Files. Let's talk about hacking. And I found what happened. Someone had used something called WinNuke 95. Who remembers WinNuke? So this is the denial of service attack that was used to crash my Windows 95 computer. All you need to do is enter an IP address, and it sends an out-of-band packet on NetBIOS port 139, and your machine would be attacked. Very different than today, where you have like Krebs servers going down on Akamai because millions and millions of machines and IoT devices distributed across a massive DDoS network get sent to one pipe. Back then, it was just a DOS. It was just one packet, right? Not millions of machines. And in fact, we didn't call it denial of service. We called it nuking. Nukes. Do you remember nukes? So I found WinNuke, and I was like, oh, this is so cool. Such a cool power. And I'm not malicious in any way. I don't even want to shut down people's computers. But just the ability to do that, or the ability to show that, is so cool. So interesting. And pretty quickly, Microsoft came out with a patch. They released, I believe it was Windows 95 Service Pack 2. And they fixed it. And I was like, oh no. It's like my magical power, my like ring. It was gone. I don't have that anymore. I was like, oh, what do I do now? And I thought, you know what? There's a guy wrote this, and his name is Bernd Bogus of the Den. If Bernd Bogus of the Den could write this, why can't I? How did he make this? And I found out that you could do something called programming and make something like this. And if you understand how a network stack works, you might be able to create a denial of service or an attack like this. Or if you learn about buffer overflows or reverse engineering, you can get into this sort of stuff. So at that age, around 10, I started getting into that. I started learning about programming and coding. And from then on, I sort of continued down learning new types of tools like Counter-Strike. bit more Counter-Strike. And I remember playing one day, and I heard some footsteps going across, like panning from my right speaker to my left speaker. It's like, oh man, that must be an enemy because I don't see them in my radar or my HUD. And I thought about it for a moment. There's like sound panning from the right speaker all the way to my left speaker. That must mean there's positional information about the attacker, the terrorist in that game. So maybe I can grab that information. I'm playing live on the internet with other people. And I start learning about packet sniffing. And I learned that I can actually I can grab information about footsteps and the positional information. And then I learned, okay, maybe I can write software to draw on the map so I can see where that person is if they're behind me, for example, and take the XY coordinates of the footsteps and draw it out. And I learned about injection and memory injection and DLL injection, and then being able to go into Counter-Strike and write code. And once I was in there, I was like, oh, you know what? Like, while we're in here, I could just like delete walls. Why don't we just do that? That made it a lot easier. And ultimately, I started releasing these I released cheats for Counter-Strike. And it all started just because I wanted to control Winamp. I wanted to change the song, and you couldn't do it from within Counter-Strike. We didn't have the cool like media keys that you do now on your keyboard. You actually had to Alt-Tab, change the song, go back into Counter-Strike. Your GPU would be messed up. You'd have like blue and red everywhere, and you'd realize you just got headshotted. So this was a lot cooler. This allowed me to control and hook the keyboard within the software. And I continued to do that, and then Counter-Strike and Half-Life, or Valve, I believe, actually created something called Punkbuster. And then they made my cheats stop working. So then, at this age, I was probably around 15. At this point, I started just going back and forth. And I'd release a new version, and they'd release a new version of Punkbuster and make it stop working. And I'd release a new version, and the game became fun again. Because when you have like God mode, it's not very fun. Like, it's fun for a day, but then it gets boring. But going back and forth with these engineers was awesome. So at that point... So that's kind of how I spent, that year and then the next year. And I was like, I kind of just stopped going to school because why would you go to school when you could play Counter-Strike? So I stayed at home, I dropped out, and I basically wrote Counter-Strike cheats for a while. And at one point, I started playing around. I moved out. At one point, my mom said, oh, Sammy, you're not paying rent. And I just lost my job to help pay rent. And I was fortunate that I got a job in San Diego doing programming. Apparently, you can make money programming. And I had no idea. I thought you could just write code cheats in Counter-Strike, and that's not the case. And at around 19, I moved back to LA, living in a place in Marina Del Rey, and all of my friends went on a website. This was 2005. And that website was called MySpace. Who remembers MySpace? Who's still on MySpace? No? Okay, just me. And everyone had a MySpace account. I was like, this is kind of cool. What is it? So I went, I checked it out. It's kind of cool. You can upload pictures. You can add friends. You can write on people's walls. I don't think they called it walls, but you could write on their profiles. And I was like, this is pretty cool. And they allowed you to do a lot of really cool things with your profile, like this. So this is my profile. They allowed CSS and images and background colors and all sorts of stuff. And I thought, man, what could I do that would make my profile stick out, make it a little cooler? And they had a drop-down for relationship status. So they had, single, in a relationship, married, divorced, etc. And I wanted mine to say, in a hot relationship. But this wasn't a selection in the drop-down. Now, at first I checked, are they just sending the text, right? Are they sending the text in like a post? Maybe I can just change it. But no, it's actually ID-based. So they were sending an ID 1 to 10 based off the status of your relationship. So I couldn't just send my own text. So then I thought, what else can I do to modify the page? It was around 2005. And I realized that if I could execute JavaScript on the page somehow, then maybe I'd be able to change the text within that one portion. And I found that MySpace did not allow JavaScript. They blocked it in any way possible. Then I found that I could exploit the filters within the browser to execute JavaScript in a way that technically wasn't JavaScript. I could put it in a div tag and then break the word JavaScript into 2 with a new line, and that would pass the filters on MySpace, break the filters on the browsers, and then still execute the JavaScript. And this allowed me to change in a hot relationship. So that's kind of funny. What else can I do? I thought, okay, if I can make someone just change the text of the page, maybe I can make them add me as a friend. So that'd be kind of funny. If I can make someone visit my profile, now they'd add me as a friend. Now, around this time, something else came out that was really, really cool. Who remembers MapQuest? MapQuest. Okay, MapQuest was kind of cool, right? It was like you got to get directions instead of using like a big Thomas guide or a big piece of paper that was like this wide. You'd go in, you type in your source and destination, and you'd get turn-by-turn directions, and you'd get a map. And if you wanted to zoom, you'd hit click, zoom, the page would refresh. You wanted to go east a little bit, you hit east, the page would refresh. No, too far east, let's go west, page would refresh. And then Google Maps. Best day of my life. Finally, you could just drag. You remember that? You could just drag the map. It was incredible. It was so cool. I was like, what are they doing? What is this like magic that they're using in the browser? This was called Ajax. So this was the Web 2.0. This was about 11 years ago. I was like, this technology is so cool. It's able to make all of these requests in the background, and you don't have to hear the Internet Explorer click every time like a new request happens. And you can just keep doing those requests like dynamically. It's very, very awesome. I thought, what else can I do with this? Maybe I can use this with like the MySpace stuff I'm playing around with. So I thought, you know what? If I can do this, I couldn't make someone, let's say, write a comment because they had a CSRF token. So they had a token that you had to submit if you wanted to, let's say, do certain things, like update your profile. But I thought maybe I can use Ajax to grab that token and then submit it. So then I realized what I could do with JavaScript is I could actually make someone visit my profile, not only add me as a friend, but add me as a hero. So now, if you would visit my profile, you would add me as a friend, but then you would also add, but most of all, Sammy is my hero to the end of your heroes. So if your heroes section said like my mom, my dad, and my dead grandmother, it would now say my mom, my dad, my grandmother, but most of all, Sammy is my hero. That's kind of funny. So it's like, probably in a week, I'll have a bunch of friends, and I'll show off to my nerdy friends, and they'll think it's funny, and that's that. So a few days go by, and I check, and I have no new friends. Like, oh man, what can I do to make this go faster? Well, maybe I can use that Ajax stuff. That stuff's pretty cool. Maybe if someone visits my profile, not only will they add me as a friend and add me as a hero, but maybe I can copy the code onto their profile. So when someone visits their profile, they add me as a friend and add me as a hero and add the code to their profile. And in like a month, I should have, I don't know, 6 new friends in that scenario. Just like, all right, I'll try that. And I don't really expect it to work either because he writes code here. It never works the first time. Right. So I put it on my profile one night, and I go to sleep. I'm like, best case scenario in a month, I'll have like 100 friends. Someone will complain, and then MySpace will remove it. So I wake up in the morning, and 8 hours later, and I'm like, check my profile. Do I have any new friends? And I have like 10,000 new friends from, the dozen or two that I had before. I'm like, oh no. What do I do? At that point, I'm like, okay, I should contact MySpace. So I sent them an anonymous email. It's like, hey, something happened weird, something to my profile. I'm just a random user. Some guy named Sammy somehow added his profile added his picture on my profile. And like every time I delete it, he comes back. Because apparently whenever you delete somebody or delete some text, it goes back to your profile, which re-executes the code, which re-adds me and re-adds the And it looks really obfuscated because they had very little text. They had very little content or size that I could submit. So I had to obfuscate everything and just write a custom obfuscator and compressor. And when I submitted that, and I was like, I saw all this code on my profile. I think this is what it does. Detailed explanation of exactly how this works. And I think if you do this one thing, you can block the whole thing. Right? I just wanted to stop spreading. I didn't really know what was going to happen. So I called my girlfriend. I was like, hey, do you want to get lunch? She's like, what's wrong? I was like, what do you mean? I just want to get lunch. So I went to Chipotle, enjoyed a burrito, went back to work, was kind of freaking out, had 100,000 new friends. And at this point, I can't do anything about it. So immediately I'm like, I want to delete my profile, so at least my face doesn't show up on 100,000 profiles. So I delete my profile. It's like, are you sure you want to delete? I was like, yes. It's like, are you absolutely sure you cannot undo this? I was like, yes. Okay. Your profile will be deleted in 24 hours. I'm like, okay, awesome, great. So at that point, I really had nothing to do. I was at work, I couldn't think. And I felt kind of awful because Fox had just purchased MySpace for $580 million. So I didn't want Rupert Murdoch. At this point, I just kept trying to work, couldn't really think about it. And I drove home. And at this point, it was around 900,000 profiles, 900,000 people. And these are individual people, right? I, of course, removed the worm from my profile, but it's a virus. It's like the cold. You might sneeze on someone and get them infected, but just because you're cured the next day, that doesn't help them, right? It helps no one else. So now I'm just purely refreshing because I'm curious, like how quickly this thing is working. And it's doubling basically every hour. And in under 20 hours, it hit 1 million, at which point I took a screenshot. Well, I took a bunch of screenshots. And then I'm trying to figure out how fast it's actually moving. It's moving thousands of people per second. And I'm refreshing and refreshing. I'm at home, just like, what do I do? Like, I feel, I did not intend for this to travel this quickly. And then I refresh and it finally says, this profile has been taken down. So at around 1 million, 20,000 people, my profile was taken down. I'm like, finally, someone did it. So within a day, they were able to take the profile down and the worm down. So I was like, I wonder what happened to the other profiles. So I went to my girlfriend's profile. Does it still say Sammy's my hero? And it says, this profile is down. So I go to myspace.com and it says, sorry guys, everyone's here working on it. The system is down. And we're all here working on it. And I felt awful. I felt absolutely terrible because I know what it's like to have servers that are down. It sucks. And I was living in Marina Del Rey and I thought maybe I should drive over. I think they're in Beverly Hills. Maybe I should go over there and just apologize, bring some coffee and donuts, be like, can I help with some SQL queries? And nothing happened. I just stayed at home and a day went by and I didn't really know what to expect. I was 19 years old. And a week went by and nothing happened. And like 2 weeks went by and someone emailed me and said, hey, like, we heard about your worm. And I was like, what are you talking about? It's like, oh, the worm with the picture of you? I was like, oh, okay, fine. The one that says your name? Yeah, it was me. So they said, so did you hear from anyone? Did MySpace contact you? And I said, no, MySpace never contacted me. Like, did the police contact you? He was like, no, the police never contacted me. He's like, Fox? Nope, never contacted me. No one contacted me. I was like, okay. So what do you think about the shirts? I was like, what shirts? I was like, they're selling Sammy's My Hero t-shirts. I was like, that's awesome. Are you making money off that? No, but that's okay. A month goes by, and 2 months goes by, and 3 months go by. 6 months go by. I'm like, all right, that was fun. I'm never doing that again. That was a mistake. I'm glad nothing happened. I'm really fortunate for that. And one day I'm walking down to my brand new car, sweet car, and I see two guys standing next to it. And I'm like, oh no, I'm getting carjacked. They're like, Sammy? I'm like, what? Like, Sammy? It's like, yeah. And then I realize carjackers don't know your name. They say, we have a search warrant. I was like, oh no. And I don't know anything about search warrants, right? Nothing at all. But I know on 24, they always say, show me the search warrant. So I said, show me the search warrant. I was like, does that work? Like, is that real life? I didn't know. So I tried it. And they're like, okay, we'll show it to you. We'll show it to you. And then two more guys come up. And then they'll show me badges. And they're Electronics Crimes Task Force, United States Secret Service, Los Angeles District Attorney, and California Highway Patrol. Probably because of my sweet car. And for the first time, something in the movie Hackers was real. I was getting raided by 12 people with guns, going through everything. We walked upstairs, and there's 12 agents in my home going through everything. My girlfriend is in sheets crying. My roommate is in a bath towel, upset, really pissed. Apparently, what had happened was they went to the complex, got the key from my place, walked inside. My girlfriend was sleeping naked under the sheets. Simultaneously, my roommate was getting ready for work, so he was in the shower. So both of them, they got walked in on naked in 2 separate rooms. So they were pretty upset. I was the only person who had some decency and got clothed, and then they came to me. And I had no idea what to do. And I read the search warrant. I still didn't know if it was about MySpace. So I was like, I kind of hope it's for MySpace. So I read the search warrant, and they mentioned MySpace. And then finally, they had the address that they were allowed to search. And then there was another address. I was like, what's this? And I was like, oh no, this is my company. It's like, you guys are going to go to my company too? And they're like, we're already there. Apparently, another dozen agents were in the company I had started 2 years prior, probably 30 employees at that point. And I don't know what happened. All I know is I talked to the CEO later, and he's like, yeah, they came in. They said, I co-founded it with him, and they said, who runs this place? And Chris, the CEO, came out and said, yeah, me. He said, what does Sammy Kamkar have access to? It's like, oh, everything. So the guy looks back to the other guy, all right, take everything. And we're like a hybrid hosted system entirely dependent on the servers. And I don't know what they said. Maybe he ultimately told him I was an intern or something and got him just to take my computer and nothing else, fortunately. And then for 6 months back and forth, I fought with the district attorney in Los Angeles. And what was super interesting is that MySpace never came after me. This was the government. This was entirely the government that came after me and said, Sammy, you shouldn't have written that worm. Which I shouldn't have. I think that's obvious. And going back and forth, we finally came to an agreement. 3 years, no computer. Some amount of restitution, probation, basically until I'm a good person. Caltrans community service, basically picking up trash on the side of the road for 720 hours, which felt like a lot more. So all of that, and basically, technically I wouldn't be able to touch a computer or the internet for the rest of my life unless I'm on good behavior. So at some point in the future, I could go back and say, hey, I've been good. I haven't written any other viruses. You can give me a computer again. And this was all under the Patriot Act. And so I agreed to that. And then I went for 3 years and I didn't touch a computer. And after that, I went back to court and they said, okay, Sammy, you've been good. So 3 years later, I was able to touch a computer again. No more probation, paid off everything, and I was back. And I was like, wow, that was a really interesting part of my life. Actually going from not having a high school diploma, not knowing anything but computers, to not touching a computer at all. And definitely one of the most interesting parts of my life. I'd say it's very cool, and I'm kind of happy it happened to me. But once I was back, I thought, what do I do next? Computers and hacking is still super, super interesting to me. There's something really intoxicating about being able to, it's a puzzle, right? So it's solving a puzzle is fun. You feel kind of good after you solve a puzzle in, let's say, a book, right? But someone had designed that puzzle for you to solve. When you're hacking something, when you're breaking into something, you're trying to solve a puzzle that was never meant to be solved in the first place. It's even more exciting, right? No one meant for you to get to that entrance or exit, but you got there anyway. They thought they had drawn walls all around, and they hadn't. So there's something really, really cool about that. So I thought when I come back, I should look into stuff that might help consumers and might help people just understand what's happening, because I'm not a malicious person. I just like, breaking into things. How can I do that and still not go to jail? So when I came back to computers, I just started looking at other technologies that were interesting to me. So drones. Who remembers when Amazon said they were going to start flying drones around and delivering packages? All right. So I think drones are really cool. They're really exciting technology. Mobile has pushed the cost down of so many things like accelerometers, gyroscopes, IMUs. And now we can have drones for $100. You can go get a drone that flies around and uses GPS and can do some pretty amazing things. But I don't necessarily want a drone flying down my street, right, dropping off packages, or kids throwing rocks at it, or it dropping things on people. And I thought, that's kind of cool that Amazon's doing this. It might work in some areas where there's not a lot of dense population. But what's the security? Is there security with drones? So that day I went out when they announced this, and I got the most ubiquitous consumer drone at the time, the Parrot AR drone. And I found that I could actually take it over. I could get in. So I created something called Skyjack as an open source project to demonstrate some of the security issues with today's drones. And essentially, Skyjack, you'd fly around like a normal drone. And it would fly around looking for the wireless signals of any other drone within wireless distance, at which point it would take all of them over and produce a swarm of zombie drones under your control that you can now fly around and do anything. And at this point, I was also interested in data and privacy. There's some, we now have mobile phones, and there's so much data that's constantly leaving our phone every single day. What's going on? How do we know what's leaving? How do we know what we're actually putting out there? Do we even know what we're putting out there every day? I don't. I personally don't. So, what's some of the stuff that's happening? I started just looking into the projects that are coming out, and there's some amazing stuff coming out. MIT made something called Gaydar, and they could tell you your sexuality from your Facebook profile. even if you didn't say it. So they would actually look at your Facebook profile, all the public information, even though you didn't specify your sexuality, they'd be like, oh, by the way, you're gay. Like, actually, you really are. Or they'd say you're straight. And they would tell you with full accuracy. It's absolutely insane. They're doing this from data that is entirely available, even though you might be trying to hide something, even though you may want to keep something, private to yourself. Another website that's absolutely incredible, pleaseRobMe.com. Has anyone seen this? Please rob me. It's great. So basically, whenever someone like me goes on, or like any of us, go on Twitter and say, oh, by the way, I'm going to OWASP, I'll be in DC, I won't be in LA. It says, oh, by the way, Sammy just left his house, you can go rob him, he'll be gone for 3 days. We put this out there, right? It has my name on there right now because I'm here. But that's amazing, right? That's really funny. It scours Foursquare and Twitter and Facebook for the information that we're actually giving. And I think there's like so much incredible information that we're putting out there and so many easy ways to attack things that it's really cool to see it. It's really cool to see all the ways that, if you're targeting someone, what are the ways that you could attack them? If you're doing a shotgun approach, what are the methods? What are the techniques that are possible? And how can we secure ourselves against them? This is Matt Honan. I feel bad for this guy. He's an editor at Wired. He woke up one day and his Gmail had been hacked. And his Twitter had been hacked, and his iCloud had been hacked. His MacBook was empty. Everything was deleted. His iPad, everything gone. His iPhone, everything deleted. Racial slurs coming from his Twitter. Basically, people had broken into his Amazon account. And in Amazon, you can't do much. Maybe you can order some books for him. But they hacked into his Amazon account and got the last 4 digits of his credit card number. And then they called Apple, and they're like, hey, Apple, I lost my iCloud account info. I'm like, okay, well, what's the last 4 digits of your credit card number? We'll verify you. And iCloud gave the hackers access to his account. They broke in, they got into iCloud, they deleted his MacBook, they deleted his iPad, they deleted his iPhone, they deleted all backups, everything that he had, all his information, all of his data. And then they went into his email and then changed the passwords of all of his social networks and then deleted everything on there and then started doing racial slurs. Absolutely crazy what you can do from those 4 numbers, right? The last 4 of your credit card. Which is funny because I got full credit card numbers from so many of you as you walked in. That's great. John McAfee. Okay, who remembers John McAfee? Yeah, this guy. Oh my God, he's insane. Who still uses McAfee antivirus? Yeah, no? A couple people. It's still around. Oh man, so he was on the lam for, in connection with the murder of his neighbor somewhere in Central America. And then Vice caught up with him, and an editor at Vice actually went on the lam with him, and they documented. And it was really fun to read, especially when they accidentally left the EXIF coordinates, the GPS coordinates of the image. So as soon as they released the image, someone found the GPS coordinates. He was captured 2 days later. Right? We do this every time we take an image. Every time we take a picture with our phones, we leave that GPS data in there. I leave it in there. People constantly tell me all my images have like my location. I'm like, oh man, I forgot. Now I have a script that just runs constantly on my web server, replacing that GPS information with the NSA's location. And you can take this. This is a friend of mine. He'd post pictures up on Twitter, and I just download his images. I'd extract the GPS, and then I made a little website so you could just track him wherever he went over time, and where the images were and where they were taken. And there's so much other cool stuff that's coming out, like HTML5 geolocation. This stuff is really, really cool. So a few years ago, I found that I could actually go, using HTML5 geolocation, a new feature within the browser, I could go to a website, execute some JavaScript, and that would basically return to me the exact physical coordinates of where I was. I was like, this is amazing. Now, normally you'd have to authorize it. So it would say, do you want to allow this website to know your location? So instead, I just use simple cross-site scripting to access your MAC address from your router, and then I take that information for you automatically whenever you visit my website, and I send it to Google. And then Google would return with the physical coordinates of where you were. I was like, how does that even work? And apparently, it's through Street View. So Google Street View cars, not only are they taking photos of everywhere they're driving, but they're also triangulating that with the coordinates and of all of the wireless MAC addresses around. So any router, whether it's encrypted or not, the MAC address is entirely public. So they're taking the signal strength and then putting it up in their database. So now, whenever you send a MAC address to Google, they will know exactly where you are, more accurately than GPS because of the signal strength of all of the wireless networks. I was like, this is awesome. So now when you visit my website, I don't even ask you. I know exactly where you are. Like Jack Bauer style, I know exactly where you're located. And I started talking about this, and I went to Slovakia and did a talk around some of this geolocation stuff, which I thought was a really cool exploitation. And they're like, well, that's a really cool attack, Sammy, but fortunately, well, they said it like, oh, that's a very cool attack, Sammy. It's my Slavic accent. But they said that it's illegal for Street View cars to exist over there, so they don't do it. I was like, oh, that's kind of interesting. So then we tested it anyway, and it still knew exactly where we were. Exactly. So how were they doing that? Well, what does Google have everywhere? Android. Android devices are absolutely everywhere. And apparently they weren't saying this, but every Android device in the world was war driving, taking information about every single router around you, whether you're on that router or not, taking your GPS location, taking the signal strength of every wireless network, and triangulating all of that and sending it up to Google, and they're now storing it. Oh, and so is iPhone, and so is Windows. All of these phones are doing that. And I discovered that actually the Windows Phone and iPhone would continue to take this information after you've disabled GPS or location services. So after you said no, it'd be like, oh, you want to use maps? Sorry, you disabled this. But we'll still collect that information anyway. So like, there's got to be a cool way to release this information, because all of it was encrypted and obfuscated. No one had determined this yet, that this was actually happening. So I created an app that essentially that would basically take you from a source to your destination, just like Google Maps. So you put in, I'm at this address right now, this hotel, and I'd like to go to this bar down the street. And you'd get turn-by-turn directions in my app. And simultaneously, I found that it was actually, Google is using this crowdsourced information to show you live traffic. So that's how you get live traffic view. So my app, whenever I want to go somewhere, I'd type in the directions, and it would tell me how to get there. And simultaneously, it would send thousands and thousands of fake Android requests to Google saying, I'm an Android device, I'm on this route, and I'm moving 0 miles per hour. So that everyone else would get a red and black line on my route and get diverted to different roads. You can purchase the app from me later if you'd like, if you're interested. So this is just absolutely incredible. And there's so many new technologies coming out, and I thought, what else is coming out? What's the new research that's coming out that's really exciting? So I'd love to just share with you some of the stuff that I think is super exciting to me, super scary. Some of the things that I think are happening today, I think governments, corporations might be using against us that we don't quite know about yet, and are happening with low-cost tools. This is a really cool quote that I saw on Major Malfunction's website. In my experience, once data becomes invisible, something magical happens. They forget about security, right? If we can't see it, we don't know it. So, originally very cool attacks started with compromising emanations via Tempest attacks. So since the 60s, the NSA was able to basically take information from a monitor, from a CRT in another room, just based off the RF emanations. They were able to see what was on that monitor, and they weren't even in the room. And that was in the 60s. I mean, this kind of stuff has progressed, and you can't necessarily do that with an LCD, but there's so many other cool attacks like that I think are incredible. At DEF CON a few years ago, someone demonstrated that you could use a laser, or you essentially use a laser and bounce it off a laptop. And as soon as it bounces off the laptop and you pick it up, you can then detect unique vibrations from that laptop. What are those unique vibrations? Those are keystrokes. So when you're typing a key, if you're typing the A key, that's next to the S key. Well, the A key has a unique signature of how it vibrates due to the location on the keyboard. And an S key also has a unique signature based off where it is on the keyboard. So even though you don't know they press the A key versus the S key, you can distinguish that those are two separate keys. And you can distinguish that, oh, it looks like the same key was pressed again, and again, and again. But what key is pressed the most? If you're writing English, for example, the space bar. So now you have word boundaries. So once you get about 100 characters of the language that you know, at least in English, you can then start to do frequency analysis. Can you see that? Okay. Yeah, you can do frequency analysis and figure out exactly what letter and what word and exactly everything someone is typing. Then you have like consumer FLIR cameras, infrared cameras that can pick up thermal radiation. So you can, after someone types in their PIN number, you can just go and take a picture of the ATM pad and pick off their number. Here it's 12345, right? Just their heat signature, touching each code. There's been some French research where they found that people were able to essentially put a smart card in the middle of a credit card. So let's say you were stealing credit cards and you wanted to do chip and pin transactions. It would verify that the chip is there. It would then do a pin request, and you'd put in the pin for the man in the middle. For essentially really the top chip is your chip, and you'd say, "Oh, here's my pin." And then when you wanted to run the transaction, it would then bypass everything and then send it to the next chip underneath, which was the stolen card. So you just paste this little thing on top, and now you have a chip and pin card that is legitimate chip and pin, validates your pin signature, and you get to buy free stuff. So cool. I recently did a project just looking at how mag stripes work. And you can just take any credit card and stick it in black iron oxide filings. And you can literally read every single bit by bit, with the naked eye, off of a credit card. And I started seeing what else can I do with that. Quickly, I discovered that I can start detecting, let's say, Amex numbers. I created something called MagSpoof, which is a little device that you can just put up to any normal magstripe reader. This is not NFC or RFID. Normal magstripes. Produce a strong electromagnetic field, and then emulate a swipe. So I can make essentially a credit card that, let's say, if I found your Amex, I found that Amex has a very simple sequence that they continue. So if you steal someone's Amex or find it, you can then use their card. And as soon as it stops working, as soon as they've called the credit card company, you press a button and you get their next Amex number before they even have it and start using it again. So many amazing things. Berkeley did some such cool research where they actually used the microphone to track acoustic emanations from keyboard keystrokes. So similar to the laser, they were using sound. They're using simply sound on a phone. And they did this on an iPhone. They went into an office, set the iPhone down on a desk, someone typed a sentence, and they could extract exactly what that person was typing. Exactly. Absolutely nuts. There's the accelerometer, where people have used accelerometer in background apps to track what you're typing, to track PIN numbers. So if there's an app in the background, they can access the accelerometer, they can access the gyroscope and magnetometer, and take that data and then use it for other purposes. I mean, they're just finding out what you're typing to your friend entirely in the background. The University of Israel in Tel Aviv are doing a ton of really cool things. They're doing acoustical intelligence, where they also take an Android phone and they set it down next to a computer. And the computer starts encrypting an email via PGP, and the phone simply listens. And phones can listen to more frequencies than we can. So they can actually hear ultrasound. And they can hear the ultrasound coming off the capacitors and resistors around the CPU. And doing an encryption, like encrypting an email via PGP, is a pretty heavy, computationally expensive operation that produces another unique signature. If it uses, let's say, a 1 bit for the first bit of the key, it's going to take one operator versus a different operator that uses a different amount of power and ultrasound. So they can listen to the key as it's encrypting the email, and they can extract a full 4096-bit RSA key from that, from an Android device, unmodified, with software, today. You can do that. You can download software and do this today. Who is already doing this? Are people already doing this? Electrical outlets. Other people at DEF CON showed that you can actually go into any room and plug into an electrical outlet, and that ground line is shared with every other ground line on the circuit. And if someone has a computer plugged in with a leaky keyboard, they're typing on their keyboard, and those emanations are the electrons that are traveling through the, let's say, USB, will leak onto the ground of your computer, which is plugged in to the same ground that's plugged into the rest of the circuit. And from another circuit on the ground line, you can hear the same keystrokes and pick up those keystrokes. Oh my God, bag of chips. Who's seen one of these? If you ever see one of these, you need to watch out. This is a Lay's bag of chips. Researchers at MIT put this thing in a soundproof room. They put up soundproof glass and then took a standard DSLR camera from 15 feet away and looked at the bag of chips. People in the room talked, and their talking produced sound waves, which produced vibrations in the air, which vibrated onto the bag of chips. When they extracted the vibrations from the DSLR camera outside of the room, they converted that frequency of change back to frequency in sound and played back what they said inside the room. The soundproof room. They used a DSLR camera and a bag of chips. So watch out for these bags of chips. And now, I mean, people are buying e-cigarettes and they're just getting malware. Like, e-cigarettes really are unhealthy. They plug it in to recharge the first time, and it gives them malware onto their computer. If anyone's interested in this, I do have a project on my GitHub where I've decrypted the firmware of a common e-cigarette, and I'm working on also malicious firmware. So even if they bought it in the store and they plug it into recharging your computer, you can give them malware where the e-cig can then emulate an HID keyboard. So they charge it on your computer, it downloads the new firmware, they go back home, they recharge it, it starts typing on their keyboard. It starts injecting stuff. And of course, so many devices. I mean, running operating systems. You know, you have your voice over IP phones. You have wireless keyboards, right? All of these are full computers. You have IME toys from Mattel, which have RF chips that are full transceivers under a gigahertz. They can transmit and receive. I found that you can basically open up any garage in under 10 seconds using this girl's toy. It's absolutely incredible. So much radio frequency and so much new stuff coming out, right? If you take any car, it has hundreds and hundreds of computers, literally hundreds of computers in a single vehicle today, right? Microcontrollers are everywhere. And no one's, very few people are looking at all the different ways that we can attack something. So I'm really excited about this next stretch of attacks, sort of the next generation of these attacks. I think a lot of them, come from this physical phenomena, things that are technically not, logically are not necessarily insecure. It's just as a byproduct of the way physics works and the way radio frequency works and electromagnetism, that we're leaking so much information. We can exploit so much. I think we can come out with some cool new attacks, and I love to see new attack vectors. So, I ask all of you, let's look for some new hacks, some new attacks. Of course, I'm not going to leave you with all that scary stuff. There is a way to protect yourself. I mean, a little tinfoil goes a long way. But seriously, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to share some of this stuff, and I hope to see some cool methods of security and also attacks from the rest of you. Thanks for having me.